The stillness of the night wrapped around me like a thick blanket, a cocoon of silence that I had come to cherish after a long day. The clock on my bedside table ticked softly, its sound almost hypnotic. I was on the verge of drifting off when the piercing howl of Bella, the neighbor's dog, shattered the tranquil atmosphere. It was a cry filled with distress, a lament that sent a chill racing down my spine. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, the peacefulness of my surroundings suddenly feeling like a deceptive facade. "Bella, what's wrong?" I muttered to myself, leaning closer to the window. I peered out into the darkness, half expecting to see the dog pacing, her fur bristled and eyes wide with fear. Instead, the night was silent again, save for the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. As I settled back into my pillow, trying to ignore the disquieting feeling that had settled over me, I heard it, a whisper that seemed to echo inside my very mind. "You are not safe here." The words slithered through my thoughts like a shadow, curling and twisting until they lodged themselves firmly in my consciousness. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Who was whispering? Was I losing my mind? I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet landing on the cold wooden floor with a soft thud. I needed to understand what was happening. Not just to me, but to Maplewood. The recent disappearances that had been the talk of the town were gnawing at me, and I felt an inexplicable pull to uncover the truth. I could no longer ignore it. Curiosity mingled with dread, driving me to action. I slipped on my jacket and grabbed my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I stepped outside. The air was crisp, and the moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the street. I walked toward Bella's house, her whimpering still echoing in my ears. As I approached, I saw her silhouetted against the porch light, her body tense and alert. "Bella," I called softly, crouching down to her level. "What's got you so worked up?" She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes, and I reached out to scratch her behind the ears. "It's okay, girl. I'm here." But even as I comforted Bella, a sense of foreboding crept up my spine. It was as if the very air around us was charged with an unsettling energy. I glanced around, my instincts screaming at me to be cautious. Had anyone else felt it? Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Thompson, Bella's owner, appeared, her face drawn with worry. "Tom, is that you?" she called out, her voice shaky. "Have you heard the whispers too?" I straightened up, surprised at her words. "You heard them? I thought I was imagining things." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her expression grave. "It's been happening for weeks now. I thought it was just the stress of everything going on, but it feels too real, doesn't it?" I felt a chill wash over me. "What do you mean? What's been going on?" She hesitated, glancing back into the house as though afraid of what might be lurking in the shadows. "People are disappearing, Tom. First, it was Mr. Eldridge from down the street, and then the Johnsons. No one knows where they've gone. And now I'm hearing voices." My stomach twisted in knots. I need to find out what's happening. I can't sit around and let fear take over. Mrs. Thompson frowned, worry etched across her features. "Be careful, dear. Something isn't right. You should talk to Clara. She's been acting strange too." "Clara?" I echoed, my brow furrowing. I had often seen her walking her dog at odd hours, always looking around as if expecting someone to jump out at her. "What do you mean strange?" "I just mean she seems frightened, and she's been saying things about the new neighbor, the one they call Mr. Gray." The name struck a chord in me, and I felt a thread of determination weaving its way through my fear. "I'll talk to her," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Maybe she knows something." As I turned to leave, Bella whimpered again, and I looked back at her. "You stay safe, girl," I whispered, feeling a pang of sympathy for the anxious dog. "I'll figure this out." I made my way down the street, my thoughts racing. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist as I walked, the whispers in my mind growing louder. "You are not safe here." The sun was just beginning to rise when I reached the park, the first rays of light illuminating the path ahead. It was empty, the usual morning joggers and dog walkers conspicuously absent. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down as I scanned the area for Clara. There she was, sitting on a bench, her gaze fixed on the ground. I approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Clara?" I called softly, and she looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Tom," she replied, her voice a whisper. "I was hoping I'd see you." I sat beside her, and for a moment, we both fell silent, the weight of our shared unease hanging in the air between us. "Have you heard the whispers?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a murmur. She nodded, biting her lip. "I thought it was just me, but I've been feeling watched. And then there's Mr. Gray. What do you know about him?" I pressed, feeling a sense of urgency. "He moved in a few weeks ago, right around the time the disappearances started," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something off about him, Tom. I can feel it." I nodded, my mind churning. "I need to know more. We need to find out what's going on." Clara hesitated, her brow furrowing in thought. I have an old diary that belonged to my grandmother. She mentioned something about an entity that feeds on fear. I always thought it was just a story, but now it feels real." I finished for her, my heart racing. "Let's find that diary. It might hold the key to understanding all of this." As we spoke, I felt a connection forming between us, a bond forged in the fire of our shared fears. We were both searching for something, a way to make sense of the chaos that had descended upon Maplewood. "Clara, we can't let fear control us," I said, determination hardening in my voice. "We need to confront whatever is out there." She nodded slowly, the ghost of a smile appearing on her lips. "You're right. Together we can figure this out." But as we sat there, the whispers continued to swirl around us, a chilling reminder that danger lurked just beyond our comprehension. And in that moment, I understood that our journey into the heart of the darkness had only just begun. As dawn broke over Maplewood, the stillness of the night was replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. However, my mind was still tangled in the remnants of a restless night. The howling of Bella, the neighbor's dog, had shattered my sleep, and the echo of that eerie whisper, "You are not safe here," lingered in my ears. I felt a strange pull to understand the shadows that seemed to loom over our quaint town. With a mix of trepidation and determination, I made my way to the local park. The sun was just rising, casting a warm golden light that contrasted sharply with the chill of the night air. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. People were disappearing, and it all seemed to coincide with the arrival of the enigmatic Mr. Gray. I had to know more. As I entered the park, I spotted a figure sitting on a bench, her head bent low. It was Clara, a neighbor I had seen around but never really spoken to. There was something haunting about her demeanor. I approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. "Hey, Clara," I offered, trying to sound casual. "You all right?" She looked up, her eyes wide and filled with apprehension. "Tom, I'm not sure. Did you hear it too?" I nodded, recalling the unsettling whisper that had invaded my thoughts. "You mean the voice?" "Yes. It's been bothering me all night." She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to ward off an invisible chill. "I'm worried, Tom. It's not just the voice. It's the disappearances. They started right after Mr. Gray moved in." "Mr. Gray," I repeated, intrigued. "What do you know about him?" Clara hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone was listening. "Not much, just that he keeps to himself. But there's something about him, something dark." My heart raced at her words. "I think we need to find out more. We can't just sit back and let this happen." She looked at me, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "You're right. I've been trying to dig into his past. There's got to be a reason for all this." As we spoke, a connection began to form between us, a bond forged in the face of a shared fear. I felt a sense of camaraderie, a feeling that we were both searching for answers in a town that had become a shadow of its former self. "Do you have any leads?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Clara nodded slowly, I found some old records at the library. They mentioned strange occurrences in Maplewood, disappearances, and even something called an entity that feeds off fear. An entity? I echoed, my mind racing. What do you mean? It's hard to explain, she said, biting her lip. But it seems to be connected to the town's history. Every few decades, people vanish, and it always corresponds with the arrival of someone new. A chill ran down my spine. Do you think Mr. Gray is involved? I don't know, she admitted, but I think we should investigate together. We can't let fear keep us from finding the truth. Her resolve inspired me, and I nodded in agreement. Let's do it. We'll start with the library and see what we can uncover. As we walked side by side, I could feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on us. Maplewood, with its picturesque houses and friendly neighbors, seemed to hide a darkness that was now creeping into the light. Clara was no longer just a neighbor. She was my ally in this unsettling quest. Arriving at the library, we found it eerily quiet. The scent of old books and polished wood filled the air, mingling with the unease that had settled in my stomach. Clara led the way to the local history section, her fingers brushing over the spines of the dusty volumes as she searched for answers. There must be something here, she murmured, pulling out a book titled The History of Maplewood. I watched her intently as she flipped through the pages, her brow furrowed in concentration. Look at this, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She pointed to a passage describing a series of mysterious disappearances that had plagued the town decades ago. It's almost identical to what's happening now. I leaned closer, scanning the text. And the entity, it says here that it feeds on fear, growing stronger with each disappearance. This is what we're dealing with. Clara's expression darkened. We need to figure out how to stop it. If it's connected to Mr. Gray, then we have to confront him. Do you think he knows? I asked, a sense of dread creeping into my thoughts. I don't know, she replied, her voice trembling slightly, but I'm willing to bet he's hiding something. We have to find out what. As we left the library, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but there was still so much left to uncover. I glanced at Clara, whose determination was palpable, and I realized how much I valued her presence in this journey. Thank you for doing this with me, I said, breaking the silence. I don't think I could face this alone. She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and gratitude. I feel the same way, Tom. It's easier to face the darkness when you're not alone. We walked in silence for a moment, each lost in our thoughts. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets of Maplewood. I could sense the weight of the town's history pressing down on us, and I knew we were on the brink of something significant. What do we do next? I asked, breaking the stillness. Let's go back to my house, Clara suggested. I have some old family records that might help us connect the dots. My grandmother used to talk about the entity. She believed it was tied to our family in some way. Curiosity and concern swirled in my mind as we made our way to Clara's house. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken fears and the promise of revelations yet to come. I could feel the tension building between us, a shared understanding that we were stepping into a realm of uncertainty. As we entered her home, Clara led me to a small study cluttered with books and papers. The room felt cozy, yet shadows lurked in the corners, as if the walls themselves were holding onto secrets. Here it is, Clara said, pulling out a worn leather-bound journal that had seen better days. This belonged to my grandmother. She wrote about the entity and the fear it brought to the town. I took the journal from her hands, feeling the weight of its history. As I opened it, the pages crackled beneath my fingertips, revealing her grandmother's elegant handwriting. Do you mind if I read it? I asked, feeling a blend of reverence and urgency. Go ahead, Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As I read, the stories unfolded like a tapestry of dread. Accounts of fear, of families torn apart by an unseen force, and of the town's desperate attempts to fight back. I could feel Clara's presence beside me, her breath shallow as she waited for my reaction. There's a passage here, I said, my eyes scanning the words. It talks about a sacrifice that must be made to banish the entity. It's linked to the fear it thrives on. Clara's face paled. A sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? I don't know, I admitted, my heart racing. But it seems like the entity demands something in return for peace. She took a step back, a look of horror dawning on her face. What if it's a person? What if it wants someone to suffer? The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. We need to find out more, Clara. We can't let it take anyone else. Just then, a sudden chill swept through the room, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Clara shivered beside me, and I felt the atmosphere shift. It was as if the shadows were closing in, reminding us of the urgency of our mission. Let's keep searching, I urged, trying to push aside the unease creeping up my spine. We can't let fear control us. We need to take back our town. As the first rays of dawn crept into my room, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me the night anterior. The howl of Bella, the neighbor's dog, had shattered the stillness, and the whispered warning, "You are not safe here," echoed relentlessly in my mind. It felt as if the shadows had eyes, watching my every move. I knew I had to find out what was happening in Maplewood, especially with the strange disappearances plaguing our small town. After a restless night, I decided to head to the local park. It was a place I often found solace, and perhaps I could clear my head. As I walked through the crisp morning air, the leaves crunched beneath my feet, but the tranquility was deceptive. My thoughts were consumed by the recent events and the mysterious new neighbor, Mr. Gray. What was his connection to all of this? Upon arriving at the park, I noticed Clara sitting on a bench, her eyes darting around nervously. There was something unsettling about her demeanor, a reflection of my own anxiety. I took a deep breath and me approximai. "Hey, Clara," I said, trying to sound casual. "You okay?" She looked up, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition before her expression hardened. "Tom, I heard Bella last night too. It was terrifying." "Yeah, it was. I couldn't sleep after that," I admitted. "Did you hear the whispers?" Her eyes widened slightly. "You heard them?" I thought I was going crazy. It said, "You are not safe here." I nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of relief wash over me. I thought it was just me, but there's something wrong in this town, Clara. I can feel it. Clara bit her lip, glancing around as if the trees themselves were listening. "I think it has something to do with Mr. Gray. Since he moved here, things have changed. People are disappearing, and it feels connected." I furrowed my brow, intrigued by her words. "What do you mean? Have you seen anything unusual?" "I haven't seen him directly, but I've heard things," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "My grandmother used to tell stories about a dark entity that would come when fear was present. I never believed her until now." "An entity?" I echoed, skepticism creeping into my tone, but I couldn't deny the chill that ran down my spine. "What kind of entity?" "The kind that feeds on fear," she explained, her fingers trembling slightly. "It was said to have taken children from our town long ago. My grandmother wrote about it in her journal." "Do you still have that journal?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Maybe it could help us understand what's going on. Clara hesitated for a moment, her expression shifting to one of indecision. "Yes, but it's not just a journal. It holds memories of a tragedy, Tom. A tragedy that I was a part of." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean? What happened?" She took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "When I was a child, there was an accident. My family, my parents, they were taken by the entity. They were looking for me, trying to protect me. I was hiding, and when I came out, they were gone. Everyone thought they had just disappeared, but my grandmother knew the truth." "Your family, were they among the missing people?" I asked, the weight of her words sinking in. Clara nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, that's why I moved back here. After all these years, I thought I could finally confront the darkness that took them." But now it feels like it's back, and I'm scared it will take more people, maybe even you. I reached out, placing my hand over hers. We can figure this out together. If we find your grandmother's journal, maybe we can discover how to stop it. Her gaze locked onto mine, a mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. Okay, let's go to my house. I need to find it. As we walked together, I sensed an unspoken bond forming between us. Two people drawn together by a shared fear and a desire for answers. Clara led the way, her pace quickening as we approached her home. The familiar scent of old wood and dust wafted through the air as we entered. Once inside, Clara led me to a small room filled with shelves of books and trinkets from her childhood. She rummaged through the clutter, her hands shaking slightly. "It has to be here somewhere," she murmured to herself. After a few tense moments, she pulled out a worn leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age. "Here it is, my grandmother's journal." I took the journal from her hands, feeling the weight of history in my palms. "Let's see what she has to say." We settled on the floor, Clara beside me as I opened the journal. The yellowed pages were filled with elegant handwriting, recounting tales of the past, family memories, local history, and eventually, the darker stories that Clara had mentioned. My heart raced as I read about the entity that had haunted Maplewood, the disappearances and the fears that had gripped the town years ago. Then, as I turned the pages, I stumbled upon a photograph tucked between the leaves. I pulled it out, my breath catching in my throat. It was a picture of a little girl, perhaps around Clara's age at the time, with a striking resemblance to her. "Clara, look at this," I said, holding the photo up. "Isn't this you?" she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she recognized the face staring back at us. I don't remember this picture. Your grandmother must have taken it. But why would she keep it here?" I wondered aloud, feeling the weight of the moment settle over us. "I don't know," Clara whispered, her voice trembling, "but it feels like there's a connection. Maybe the entity was after me even then. Maybe it still is," I said, my heart pounding. "We need to understand why it's reemerging now. This has to be more than just a coincidence." Clara nodded, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "We have to find out what the journal says about stopping it. There must be something in here that can help." As we continued to read through the journal, it became clear that Clara's family had been deeply intertwined with the town's dark history. It spoke of rituals meant to ward off the entity and the sacrifices that had been made to protect the community. Each word felt like a piece of a puzzle we were desperately trying to complete. "Tom," Clara said suddenly, her voice low, "if the entity is back, it means it's feeding on fear again. We can't show it weakness. We have to be strong." I nodded in agreement, but we also need to confront our fears directly. It seems to thrive on the darkness we hide inside. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, we shared an understanding that transcended words. We both had demons to face, hers tied to the tragic loss of her family, and mine rooted in the guilt of my past. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the room, I felt a growing sense of urgency. The more we uncovered, the closer we came to the heart of the darkness that loomed over Maplewood. "Let's keep searching," I said, pushing aside the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. "We have to find a way to stop this before it's too late." Clara squeezed my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Together, we'll uncover the truth. We won't let the darkness win." And with that resolve, we dived deeper into the journal, determined to piece together the secrets of the past and confront the malevolent force that threatened our town once more. The tension in the air was palpable when Jake, my childhood friend, reappeared in Maplewood after years of absence. I hadn't seen him since the tragedy struck his family, a haunting shadow that had loomed over both of our lives. As he approached me in the dim light of the park, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, mixed with a hint of determination that reminded me of the boy I once knew. "Tom," he said, hesitating for a moment, as if unsure how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. "I heard about what's been happening, the disappearances. I want to help. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of me was glad to see him, to have a friend by my side again in this dark time. But another part was still grappling with the resentment that had festered since his family's tragedy. "You think you can just waltz back in and act like nothing's happened?" I retorted, the edge in my voice sharper than I intended. "You left us, Jake. You left me." "I know," he replied, his voice steady despite the weight of my accusation. "I thought it was best for everyone. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" I scoffed, my frustration boiling over. "You think running away was protecting anyone? We needed you. I needed you." "Listen, I'm not here to argue," he said, his tone shifting to one of urgency. "I want to help find out what's going on. I felt things. I've seen things." I studied him closely. The Jake I remembered had always been the brave one, willing to face any challenge head-on. But now he seemed haunted, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "What do you mean, you've seen things?" He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "After everything that happened, I tried to move on, but I couldn't shake this feeling. It's like something is watching us, and it's not just the disappearances. I don't know how to explain it, but I can't ignore it anymore." A chill ran down my spine. I had been feeling the same way, but I had pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the more tangible horrors that had plagued our town. "Clara and I have been investigating," I said, the urgency of our situation pushing me to trust him, despite my reservations. "We believe the new neighbor, Mr. Gray, is somehow connected to all of this." "Mr. Gray," Jake echoed, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you know about him?" "Not much," I admitted. "Just that he moved in recently and that strange things started happening soon after. Clara thinks he might be linked to the entity that's been causing the disappearances." "An entity?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "You mean like a ghost?" "More than that," I replied, feeling the weight of the words as I spoke them. "Clara found a diary that belonged to her grandmother, and it mentioned something that feeds off fear, something that has been haunting this town for generations." Jake's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "If that's true, we have to do something. We can't just sit back and wait for it to take more people." The resolve in his voice was infectious, and I felt my own conviction strengthen. "Okay, then let's work together. We need to figure out what Mr. Gray wants and how he's connected to this horror." As we began to formulate a plan, I could feel the old camaraderie we once shared beginning to resurface, but it was laced with the tension of our past. I wasn't sure if I could fully trust Jake, but the stakes were too high to let our history dictate our actions. The next day, Jake and I met with Clara at the park. She looked relieved to see him, though I could sense an undercurrent of uncertainty in her demeanor. "I'm glad you're here, Jake," she said, her voice soft but steady. "We need all the help we can get." "Thanks," he replied, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I've been feeling like something's been off for a while. I want to get to the bottom of this." As we discussed our findings, I observed the way Clara and Jake interacted. There was a history there that I couldn't ignore. I felt a pang of jealousy mixed with the desire to keep Clara safe. It was a strange sensation, knowing that the bond one had with her could be overshadowed by the past that lingered between Jake and me. "Have you guys had any strange experiences?" Clara asked, breaking through my thoughts. "Anything out of the ordinary?" Jake exchanged a glance with me before responding. I felt watched, and there were times I thought I heard whispers in the wind. Clara's face paled. "I heard whispers too. I thought I was going crazy, but now I know I'm not alone." The three of us began to share our experiences, and as we did, the weight of our fears began to merge into a collective understanding. We were all being drawn into this web of terror, and if we were going to confront it, we needed to do so as a unit. "Let's head over to Mr. Gray's house," I suggested. "We need to see if we can find any clues that tie him to the disappearances." Jake nodded, his expression serious. "I agree. We can't let fear dictate our actions anymore." As we approached the house, a shiver of apprehension crept over me. The place loomed ominously against the twilight sky, its windows dark and uninviting. It felt as if the very walls were watching us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something dreadful awaited us inside. "We should be careful," Clara warned, her eyes darting nervously toward the entrance. "Who knows what we might find? Or who we might find," I added, my heart racing as we stepped onto the front porch. The old wood creaked beneath our weight, echoing the uncertainty that filled the air. "Let's just get in and out," Jake said, pushing the door open. It creaked loudly, and I felt a chill run down my spine as we stepped into the dimly lit interior. The air was thick with dust, and shadows danced across the walls as we moved cautiously through the narrow hallway. In the main room, remnants of a life once lived lay scattered about. Faded photographs, a broken chair, and the lingering scent of something rotten. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on us as we explored. "Look at this," Clara said, kneeling beside a peculiar symbol etched into the wooden floor. "I've seen this before. It's a sign of protection against evil." "Protection or a warning?" Jake mused, studying the mark with a furrowed brow. "What if this is a sign that something terrible has happened here?" Before I could respond, a sudden noise echoed from the back of the house. A low, guttural sound that sent a jolt of fear through me. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart racing. Jake nodded, his expression grave. "Yeah, we should check it out." We moved quietly toward the source of the sound, the tension thickening with each step. As we turned a corner, we found ourselves in a dimly lit room filled with old furniture covered in sheets. The air felt electric, and I could sense that we were on the precipice of something we might not be prepared to face. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated through the space, causing us to jump back. "What was that?" Clara gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, "but we need to find out." As we entered the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening in this house was more than just a simple haunting. It felt as if we were being drawn into a deeper darkness, one that threatened to consume us. "We have to stick together," I urged, glancing at Jake and Clara. "No matter what we find, we face it as a team." They nodded, and we stepped further into the room, ready to confront whatever awaited us in the shadows. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Clara and I stood outside the ominous house of Mr. Gray. It loomed before us, a shadow of despair and mystery, its cracked windows reflecting the early morning light like the hollow eyes of a long-forgotten specter. I could feel the tension simmering in the air, a concoction of fear and curiosity that made my heart race. "Are you sure we should be doing this?" I asked, glancing at Clara. Her expression was resolute, yet I could see the flicker of uncertainty behind her eyes. "We have to find out the truth, Tom. If Mr. Gray is connected to the disappearances, we can't just stand by," Clara replied, her voice steadying as she squared her shoulders. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. We stepped onto the creaky porch, the wood groaning beneath our weight as if warning us to turn back. Clara pushed the door open, and it creaked ominously, revealing a darkened interior that smelled of dust and neglect. As we entered, the air felt heavy, thick with secrets waiting to be uncovered. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling in places like the memories of those who once lived here. My eyes wandered, searching for anything that could provide a clue to the enigma of Mr. Gray. "Look at this," Clara called, kneeling beside a pile of old newspapers scattered across the floor. I hurried over, my curiosity piqued. "Disappearance of Maplewood's children," I read aloud, the headline sending chills down my spine. "These articles are from years ago. It's like this has happened before." "Exactly," Clara replied, her brow furrowing as she sifted through the pages. "It's as if this house has been at the center of it all." I felt a shiver race down my spine as I recalled the susurrus whispers echoing in my mind. "You are not safe here." The words seemed to resonate with the very atmosphere of the house. "Let's check the back rooms," I suggested, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me. We moved deeper into the house, the floorboards creaking underfoot. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see Mr. Gray lurking in the shadows. In the first room we entered, a thick layer of dust covered the furniture, and cobwebs hung like veils in the corners. Clara approached a dusty bookshelf, her fingers brushing against the spines of forgotten tomes. "This place feels wrong," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Agreed, but we need to find something, anything, that connects him to the disappearances." Clara's determination was palpable, and it fueled my own resolve. We continued our search, opening creaky doors that led to more darkened rooms filled with remnants of a life long abandoned. I noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, almost hidden beneath layers of grime. "Do you see this?" I pointed to a crude drawing of a face, its features twisted in agony. Clara stepped closer, her expression a mixture of intrigue and fear. "Those symbols, they look familiar," she said slowly, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "I think I've seen them in my grandmother's journal." "Your grandmother's journal?" The mention of it sparked a memory of the conversation we had shared. "The one that talks about the entity?" "Yes, she mentioned something about symbols used in rituals. I think they might be connected to whatever Mr. Gray is involved in," Clara replied, anxiety lacing her tone. "Then we need to get back to your place and take another look at that journal," I said decisively. Just as we were about to leave the room, a noise came from the back of the house, soft, almost like a whisper. Clara's eyes widened in fear. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," I replied, my heart racing. "It came from the basement." "Do you think we should check it out?" Clara asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Honestly, I'm not sure. But if there is a chance it leads us to answers, we can't ignore it," I said, my pulse quickening at the thought of confronting whatever lay below. Clara took a deep breath and nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do this." We made our way to the basement door, which was slightly ajar, creaking softly as we pushed it open. The air was cooler down the narrow staircase, and a sense of dread filled my chest. As we reached the bottom, the dim light revealed an unsettling sight. The walls were plastered with more symbols, and there were objects strewn about, old toys, clothing, and personal belongings. Each one felt like a ghostly reminder of the lives that had vanished. "Why would he keep these?" I murmured, picking up a small teddy bear. Its button eyes stared blankly at me, as if pleading for justice. Clara stepped forward, her breath hitching as she surveyed the room. "These must belong to the missing children. It's like he's collecting their memories." A shiver ran through me as I realized the implications of our discovery. Mr. Gray wasn't just a passive observer in the disappearances. He was an active participant. Suddenly, Clara gasped, her eyes wide with horror as she pointed to a corner of the room. "Look, there's a door." My heart raced as I followed her gaze. A heavy wooden door stood ominously at the far end, its surface warped and splintered. "Should we open it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Clara hesitated, biting her lip. "What if it leads to something terrible? We came this far, Clara. We need to know the truth," I urged her, my own fear pushing me forward. "Okay," she nodded, determination returning to her eyes. Together, we approached the door, our hearts pounding in unison. With a deep breath, I grasped the handle and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark passage. "Are you ready?" I asked, looking at Clara. "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, stepping into the darkness. I followed closely behind, the air thick with anticipation. As we moved deeper into the passage, I could feel a heaviness pressing down on us, as if the very walls were closing in. Shadows danced along the walls, and I sensed something lurking just out of sight. "Tom, do you feel that?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah, it's like something is watching us," I admitted, dread coiling in my stomach. We reached the end of the passage, where another door stood closed. Clara reached for the handle, but I placed my hand over hers, stopping her. "Wait, let's be careful," I said, my instincts screaming at me to proceed with caution. Clara nodded, and we exchanged a glance filled with unspoken fear. Slowly, I turned the handle, and the door creaked open. What lay before us was a small room, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. Scattered across the floor were more toys and clothing, but there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the room stood a figure, draped in tattered clothes, its back turned to us. "Mr. Gray," Clara breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure turned slowly, and I felt my heart drop as I met the cold, empty gaze of Mr. Gray. "Welcome," he said, his voice low and smooth, sending chills down my spine. "I've been expecting you." The atmosphere was thick with a palpable tension as we continued our investigation into the dark mysteries that surrounded Maplewood. Clara and Jake stood by my side, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. We had been exploring the abandoned house of the enigmatic Mr. Gray, and now we found ourselves in a dimly lit room, the air heavy with dust and the scent of decay. "Do you feel that?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she glanced around the room. I nodded, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It was as if the very walls were alive, watching us, waiting for something to happen. "Yeah, it's like something's here with us," Jake added, his brow furrowing as he stepped closer to me. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was trying to appear brave while struggling with his own fears. We had already uncovered strange symbols etched into the walls, remnants of rituals or warnings long forgotten. Each symbol seemed to pulse with a dark energy, resonating with the very essence of fear itself. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were trespassing on something ancient and malevolent. "Let's keep moving," I urged, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I stepped forward, leading the way down a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly. Clara and Jake followed closely, their footsteps echoing ominously against the wooden floorboards. As we reached the end of the hallway, we found a door slightly ajar. A draft of cold air slipped through the gap, sending chills across my skin. "Should we?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to know what's behind it," I replied, pushing the door open slowly. It creaked ominously, revealing a dark stairwell that descended into the depths of the house. My heart raced as I glanced back at Clara and Jake. "Are we really doing this?" Jake asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Yes, we have to. We can't let fear control us," I insisted, trying to mask my own trepidation. I took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, the others following closely behind. The stairs were steep and narrow, and I felt the weight of the darkness pressing in on us as we descended. "What if we find something we're not ready for?" Clara asked, her voice laced with anxiety. I paused for a moment, turning to face her. "We've already seen too much. We can't turn back now. We need to understand what we're dealing with." As we reached the bottom, the air grew colder, and I could see our breath misting in front of us. The room was vast and cavernous, filled with shadows that danced on the walls. In the center, there was a small table covered in old, dusty objects, belongings of those who had vanished from our town. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to a locket that lay among the debris. I picked it up, brushing off the dust, and felt a jolt of recognition. It belonged to a girl from our school who had disappeared years ago. "What does it mean?" Clara asked, her voice quivering as she scanned the room. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart sinking, "but it looks like these things belong to the missing people. We need to find a connection." As I turned to face my friends, a sudden rush of cold air swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering light of our flashlights. Darkness enveloped us, and I felt a rush of panic. "Clara, Jake, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm here." Clara's voice echoed in the darkness, but I could hear the tremor in her tone. "Stick together," I shouted, trying to keep the fear at bay. I could feel something shifting in the shadows, an unsettling presence that made my skin crawl. "Tom, what's happening?" Jake's voice was shaky, and I could sense his fear rising. "I don't know. Just hold on," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, from somewhere deep within the shadows, I heard it. a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. The darkness seemed to pulse around us, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "We need to get out of here," I urged, but the words felt hollow as the growling intensified, reverberating through the room. Suddenly, a figure began to manifest in the darkness, a swirling mass of shadow that twisted and contorted as if it were trying to take shape. I could feel the fear pouring off Clara and Jake, and I knew we had to stand our ground. "Clara, stay close," I shouted, stepping forward as the entity began to take form. "We're not afraid of you." The growl transformed into a chilling laugh that echoed around us, sending waves of terror crashing into my resolve. "You think you can face me?" the entity taunted, its voice like ice. "You're all just children playing in the dark." "Shut up," Jake yelled, his voice filled with rage as he stepped forward, fists clenched. "You're nothing but a coward hiding in the shadows." "Coward?" the entity hissed, its form shifting, revealing a face that was both familiar and terrifying. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't just a monster. It was a reflection of our deepest fears, the pain we carried within us. "Tom, it knows us," Clara cried, stumbling back. I could see the terror in her eyes as she faced the manifestation of our collective nightmares. "Stay strong," I urged, trying to anchor myself amid the chaos. "We can't let it win." The entity laughed again, a sound that resonated with our worst memories. "You think you can escape your past? You are all connected to me now." Suddenly, Clara fell to her knees, clutching her head as if it were about to explode. "It's inside my head. It's trying to break me." "Clara," I shouted, rushing to her side. I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine, feeling the warmth of her skin against the icy grip of fear that surrounded us. "You're stronger than this. We're with you. It's feeding on my fear," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "I can't." "No, you can," I insisted, my voice firm. "You have to fight it. Remember what we talked about. We're going to face this together." Jake knelt beside us, his expression fierce. "Clara, you're not alone. We're here. We'll help you." With a deep breath, Clara looked into my eyes, her determination flickering like a candle against the storm. "You're right. I won't let it take me." As she stood, the entity recoiled for a moment, sensing the shift in her resolve. "You think you can resist me?" it hissed, its voice dripping with venom. "Yes," Clara shouted, her voice rising above the darkness. "You don't own me. I'm not afraid of you." The entity shrieked in anger, the shadows swirling violently around us. I could feel the energy shifting, the darkness pressing in as it fought against the light Clara was igniting within herself. "Tom! Jake!" she cried, her voice filled with urgency. "We need to confront it together. We have to show it that we're not afraid." I nodded, feeling a surge of courage. "Let's do it," I shouted, and we formed a circle, our hands clasped tightly together. The entity lunged forward, its shadowy form reaching out to consume us, but we stood firm. "You don't control us," we yelled in unison, our voices intertwined, resonating against the darkness. In that moment, the shadows hesitated, and I could see a flicker of uncertainty in the entity's form. It was as if our unity was a light piercing through the veil of fear. "Together," Clara shouted, her eyes blazing with determination. "We face you together." As we channeled our collective strength, I felt the darkness begin to recede, the entity's grip on us loosening. The shadows writhed and twisted, desperate to hold onto their power, but we stood our ground, our resolve unyielding. I could feel the energy shifting, the shadows beginning to unravel as Clara's light pushed them back. "You're nothing without our fear," I yelled, the words echoing through the darkness. With one final surge, we drove the entity back, our combined strength overwhelming it. The darkness shrieked and twisted, and in a blinding flash of light, it exploded into a million pieces, scattering into the ether. As the light faded, we found ourselves back in the dimly lit room, the air still and heavy, but the oppressive weight of fear had lifted. Clara, Jake, and I stood together, breathing heavily, our hearts racing from the encounter. "We did it," Clara whispered, a mixture of disbelief and triumph in her voice. "Yeah, we did," I replied, still trying to process what had just happened. Jake let out a relieved laugh, shaking his head in astonishment. "I can't believe we faced it. Together. We're stronger than we think," Clara said, her eyes shining with newfound light. In that moment, I realized that facing our fears was more than just a battle against the darkness. It was about the bonds we formed, the friendships the air around us became thick with a sense of dread, as if the very atmosphere conspired against us. We stood in that dimly lit basement, surrounded by the remnants of despair, objects that once belonged to those who had vanished without a trace. The walls seemed to pulsate with the weight of their stories, and I felt a shiver creep down my spine. Clara was trembling beside me, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Tom," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. What if it knows we're here?" I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that we were safe, but deep down, I felt the same gnawing fear. We had ventured into the heart of the darkness, and I could sense the presence lurking just beyond our sight. It was as if we were being watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes that reveled in our terror. "Clara, we need to keep going," I said, forcing determination into my voice. "We can't turn back now. We need to understand what this thing wants." She nodded slowly, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. It was clear that she was struggling with her own demons, the shadows of her past creeping into her present. I had no idea how deeply connected she was to this entity, but I could feel the tension in the air, like a taut string ready to snap. Suddenly, Clara froze, her gaze fixed on a corner of the basement where a dark shape seemed to flicker in and out of existence. "Do you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned to follow her gaze, my heart racing. "See what? There, in the shadows. It's moving," she stammered, her eyes wide with terror. Before I could respond, the air around us grew colder, and I felt an oppressive weight settle on my chest. The shadows shifted, coalescing into a form that was both familiar and alien. My pulse quickened as the entity began to take shape, its features obscured by an inky darkness that seemed to suck the light from the room. "Clara," I said urgently, "we need to stay together. Don't let it separate us." She clutched my arm tightly, her nails digging into my skin as the entity loomed closer. "What does it want from us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think it feeds off our fear," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We have to confront it. We can't let it control us." As if sensing our resolve, the entity shifted again, and a chilling voice echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls. "You seek answers, but the truth is a burden few can bear." I felt a surge of anger at the taunting tone. "What do you want from us?" I shouted, my voice breaking the oppressive silence. "Why are you doing this?" Fear, pain, memories. The entity's voice twisted around us, wrapping us in a suffocating embrace. "I am the darkness that dwells within. I am your regrets, your sorrows, your unspoken fears. You cannot escape me." Clara gasped, stepping back as if physically struck. "No, it can't be true," she murmured, shaking her head. "I've tried to forget. I've tried to move on. But you can't," I said, my heart aching for her. "You need to confront it. All of it." The entity seemed to surge forward, its presence overwhelming. "You think you can save her? You are just as guilty, Tom. You carry your own fears, your own burdens. You cannot rescue her until you rescue yourself." I felt the weight of its words settle over me like a shroud. Memories I had buried began to surface, moments of weakness, of failure, of pain. I wanted to deny it, to push them away, but the entity was right. I couldn't help Clara until I faced my own darkness. "Clara," I said, turning to her, "we have to face this together. We can't let it control us. Whatever it is that binds you to this entity, you need to confront it." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked at me, her eyes filled with anguish. I don't know if I can, Tom. I'm so scared. I know, I said, my voice steadying. But you're not alone. We're in this together. The entity's laughter echoed around us. A cold, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. Together? You think that gives you strength? It only makes you more vulnerable. Clara took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she wiped the tears from her eyes. No, I won't let you win. I won't be a prisoner of my past any longer. Clara, I said, my heart racing as I watched her confront the darkness within herself. You can do this. Just remember, you're not alone. In that moment, Clara's expression shifted. A flicker of determination flared in her eyes, and she stepped forward. What do you want from us? She demanded, her voice gaining strength. The entity recoiled slightly, as if Clara's newfound resolve had startled it. You think you understand? You are mere children playing in the dark. Perhaps, I interjected, my voice rising in defiance. But we're not afraid of you anymore. We know you're nothing but a manifestation of our fears. Fears? The entity's voice dripped with disdain. You think you can conquer me with mere words? I am ancient. I am eternal. Then show us, Clara challenged, her voice unwavering. Show us what you really are. A silence fell, thick and oppressive, and for a moment, I thought the entity might retreat. But then, with a sudden rush, it surged forward, its form shifting and twisting until it became a swirling mass of darkness. And within that darkness, I saw visions, images of pain, of loss, of regret. No! I shouted, but it was too late. The visions flooded my mind, and I felt myself being pulled into the abyss. Tom! Clara's voice broke through the chaos, and I reached for her, our hands barely touching as we were drawn apart. Fight it! I cried, my heart racing with fear. Don't let it take you. I won't! She shouted back, her voice a beacon in the dark. I will not give in. As Clara screamed, the entity recoiled, as if her defiance was a weapon. I felt the connection between us, a thread of shared strength that pushed back against the darkness. And in that moment, I understood this was our battle not just against the entity, but against everything that had ever held us captive. Clara, I called, my voice echoing in the void. Remember who you are. You're stronger than this. I know, she yelled, her voice cutting through the entity's laughter. I am not defined by my past. The entity wailed, a sound that pierced my heart. You cannot escape me. I am a part of you. No, Clara shouted, her voice rising above the cacophony. You are not. You will not control me. The darkness began to shift, twisting and writhing as Clara stood her ground. I could see the flicker of hope in her eyes, and it ignited something within me. If she could confront her fears, then so could I. I won't be afraid anymore, I shouted, finding my own strength. You have no power over us. The entity shrieked, the sound reverberating off the walls of the basement as it thrashed in frustration. And in that moment, I felt the connection between us strengthen, a bond forged in our shared determination. We were no longer alone in this fight. We were united. Together, Clara cried, and I could see the fire in her eyes. We will face this. With one final push, we focused on the darkness, channeling our collective strength into a singular purpose. We reject you, we shouted in unison, our voices intertwining as we confronted the entity. The darkness howled in rage, but the more we stood together, the more it began to unravel. The weight of our fears, our pain, and our regrets began to lift, and in its place, a light began to emerge. A warm, radiant light that pushed back against the shadows. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the entity began to dissipate, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. The basement, once filled with despair, was now illuminated by our shared courage. Clara, I gasped, relief flooding through me as I reached for her. We did it. But as I looked into her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She was still battling the remnants of her past, the shadows that lingered just beneath the surface. Tom, I We'll face it together, I reassured her, squeezing her hand tightly. You're not alone anymore. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw a glimmer of hope in Clara's eyes. The darkness may have retreated for now, but it was clear that our journey was far from over. Together, we would continue to confront the shadows that haunted us, determined to emerge into the light. The air was thick with tension as I paced the dimly lit room where Clara, Jake, and I had gathered for what felt like our last stand against the chilling force that had been stalking Maplewood. Outside, the wind howled like a restless spirit, and the shadows danced ominously on the walls, igniting a primal fear within me. It was as if the very fabric of our reality was unraveling, and with each passing day, more people vanished into the night, leaving behind only echoes of their laughter and the scent of their fear. Time is running out, Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, usually bright and full of fire, now reflected a deep-seated dread. We need to do something, and we need to do it fast. Jake, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, looked at her with a mix of concern and frustration. What do you suggest we do? We can't just sit here and wait for that thing to take another person. We need to act. I nodded, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. I found something last night, I said, my heart racing as I pulled the ancient book from my backpack. Its leather cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. This talks about a ritual, a way to banish the entity. Clara leaned forward, her eyes widening with interest. What kind of ritual? It's complicated, I began, flipping through the pages until I found the passage I had read over and over. It requires a sacrifice, one that will bind the entity and sever its ties to this world. But it doesn't specify who the sacrifice must be. Jake's expression darkened. A sacrifice? Like a blood offering? This isn't some kind of twisted fairy tale, Tom. This is real life. We can't just throw someone to the wolves. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the book, her fingers brushing over the faded ink. But if it can save the others, if it can stop the disappearances, we have to consider it. I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. The thought of sacrificing someone, especially Clara, was unbearable. We don't know what this will entail. What if it doesn't even work? What if we make things worse? Then we have to find another way. Jake snapped, the anger in his voice echoing off the walls. There has to be another way. Stop! Clara's voice cut through our bickering like a knife. We can't afford to fight amongst ourselves. We need to focus. She took a deep breath, her face pale but determined. If there's a way to banish it, we have to try. I can't stand by and watch my friends disappear. Jake ran a hand through his hair, visibly agitated. You're talking about a sacrifice, Clara. You're talking about putting your life on the line for something we're not even sure exists. Her gaze hardened, and I could see the resolve building within her. I lost my family to this thing. I refuse to let it take anyone else. If there's a chance that I can stop it, I have to try. The room fell silent as her words sank in. I could feel my heart racing, the implications of her choice hanging heavy in the air. But Clara... No, she interrupted, her voice steady. You don't get to argue with me about this. We need to make a choice, and I'm willing to do what it takes. Clara, please, I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. We can find another way. There has to be a different approach that doesn't involve sacrificing anyone. Jake shook his head, his frustration boiling over. You're being naive, Tom. We're running out of time. If we don't act soon, we could lose Clara and everyone else. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as the weight of their words pressed down on me. The fear of losing Clara was overwhelming, but I knew that if we didn't do something soon, we would all be consumed by this darkness. Okay, let's go over the ritual again, I said, attempting to regain some control of the situation. Maybe we can find a loophole or something. Clara nodded, her expression softening as she turned to the book. All right, let's see what we can find. We gathered around the table, the flickering candlelight casting an eerie glow over the pages of the ancient text. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were tampering with forces we didn't fully understand. Here, Clara pointed to a passage. It says we need certain items to perform the ritual. A piece of the entity's essence, salt, and a personal item from the one we're trying to save. I frowned, scanning the text for any additional clues. And it doesn't say what the personal item can be, just that it must hold significance, she replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. We'll need to gather everything before sundown tomorrow. If we wait any longer, it might be too late. Jake sighed, his frustration still palpable. Fine, but I don't want anyone getting hurt. We need to look out for each other. We will, I assured him, though doubt gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The entity had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike, and I feared that our desperation would only make us more vulnerable. As the night wore on, we made plans to gather the necessary items. Clara and I would search for a personal item from her past, something that connected her to her family, while Jake would look for salt and any other supplies we might need. The tension in the room was palpable, a constant reminder of the stakes at hand. The next day, I found myself standing in front of Clara's old house, which had been abandoned since that fateful day when she lost her family. As I approached the front door, I hesitated, memories flooding back. Her laughter, her warmth, the way she used to light up the room with her smile. Now, all that remained was an eerie silence, the once vibrant home now cloaked in shadows. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice trembling slightly as I glanced at Clara. She stood beside me, her expression a mixture of determination and sorrow. I have to face this, Tom, she said firmly. If I can find something that will help us, I'll do it. For them. With a heavy heart, I nodded, and together we stepped inside. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and decay. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows, casting elongated shadows on the floorboards. As we moved through the house, Clara's fingers brushed against the walls, memories etched into every surface. What are you looking for? I asked softly, trying to keep the mood light. A toy, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Something my brother used to play with. If I can find it, maybe it will help. We made our way to the small bedroom that Clara had once shared with her brother. The room was in disarray, a time capsule of a family that once thrived here. Clara knelt next to a pile of debris, her hands trembling as she sifted through old clothes and broken toys. I can't believe it's come to this, she murmured, tears glistening in her eyes. I thought I could forget, but it's all still here. I crouched beside her, placing a comforting hand on her back. You're strong, Clara. You've faced so much already. You can do this. With renewed determination, Clara began to dig deeper. Suddenly, her hand brushed against something buried beneath the debris. She pulled it out, revealing a small, weathered teddy bear, its fur matted and its button eyes dull. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she held it close. I found it, she whispered, her voice trembling. This was my brother's favorite. I watched as tears streamed down her cheeks, the weight of her loss crashing over her like a tidal wave. It's perfect, I said softly, knowing that this small object held immense significance. We can use it for the ritual. As we made our way back to the table later that evening, I could feel the tension in the air. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us, as if the darkness was coming alive. Jake arrived shortly after, a bag of salt in hand, his expression grim. Did you find what you needed? He asked, glancing at Clara, who nodded, still clutching the teddy bear tightly. We have everything, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But we need to prepare ourselves. This is going to be dangerous. Jake swallowed hard, the fear evident in his eyes. I'm not sure if I can do this. You have to, Clara said softly, her voice filled with conviction. We need to face this together. All of us. Together, I echoed, trying to bolster our spirits. We've come this far. We can't turn back now. As darkness enveloped Maplewood, we gathered around the table, the candlelight flickering as we prepared for the ritual. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. We had to do this, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who had been taken by the entity. With Clara's teddy bear placed in the center, I began to chant the incantation from the ancient book. The words feeling foreign on my tongue, the air was thick with tension as we gathered in Clara's dimly lit living room, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. Jake stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his brow furrowed in thought. I leaned against the worn-out sofa, glancing between Clara and him, feeling the weight of the decision we had to make. "We can't just sit here and do nothing," I said, breaking the heavy silence. "People are disappearing every day. We have to act." Clara looked pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the edge of the table. "But what if the ritual? What if it requires something from me? I don't want to be the sacrifice." "Clara, it's not just about you," Jake interjected, his voice tense. "If we don't stop this entity, it could take anyone. You have to understand that we're fighting for everyone." I felt a surge of anger at Jake's words. "You're acting like it's that simple. Clara is not just a pawn in some game. She's our friend. Friends don't let friends walk into danger without a fight." Jake shot back, his eyes narrowing. "You think this is easy for me? I don't want to lose anyone else, especially not Clara." Clara looked between us, her expression a mix of fear and frustration. "I can't just stand by and let this happen. If there's a chance I can save everyone—" "No!" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You don't get to make that decision for us. It's not just your life at stake here." "Then what do you suggest?" Jake asked, his tone softening slightly. "We just sit back and wait for the next person to vanish? We've seen what this entity can do. It thrives on fear and chaos." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. "We need to find a way to perform the ritual without sacrificing Clara. There has to be another option." Clara shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "What if there isn't? What if I'm meant to be the one to end this? I've already lost so much. Maybe this is my chance to finally do something right." "No, Clara, you're not meant to be a sacrifice," I insisted, stepping closer to her. "You're meant to live, to find peace after everything you've been through. We can't let this entity take any more from you." Jake shifted uneasily, his gaze dropping to the floor as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. "What if we find a way to use the entity's power against it? To turn its own fear against it?" "That sounds risky, Jake," Clara replied, her voice wavering. "What if it backfires? What if we end up making things worse?" "Every choice we make carries risk," Jake said, his eyes flashing with determination. "But we can't let fear dictate our actions. We have to take control before it's too late." I could see the conflict in Clara's eyes, the struggle between her desire to protect those she loved and the looming shadow of the entity that haunted her. What if we create a distraction?" I suggested, the idea forming in my mind. "If we can draw the entity out, maybe we can confront it without putting you in harm's way." "How do you propose we do that?" Jake asked, crossing his arms again, skepticism evident in his tone. "Think about it," I said, pacing the small room. "The entity feeds off fear, right? What if we create a situation that amplifies our fear, drawing it out? We could set up a meeting place somewhere we know it will come." Clara's eyes widened as she contemplated the idea. "But that means we'll be putting ourselves in danger. What if it takes one of us?" "We'll have to be prepared," I replied, my heart racing with the adrenaline of the plan. "We'll face it together. If we're united, we can fight it. We've already come this far." Jake nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing somewhat. "All right, but we need to be smart about this. We can't let our fear overwhelm us. We have to stay focused." Clara took a deep breath, her voice steadier now. "I'm in. If it means protecting our town and everyone in it, I'll do whatever it takes." "Then it's settled," I said, relief flooding through me as we formed a plan. "We'll face the entity together, drawing it into a confrontation where we can use everything we've learned." As we discussed the details, I could feel the bond between us strengthening, a shared sense of purpose overcoming the divisions that had threatened to tear us apart. We were no longer just three individuals caught up in a nightmare. We were allies united against a common foe. Later that night, I lay in bed, the echoes of our conversation swirling in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that loomed over us. What if we failed? What if the entity was too powerful? I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but the shadows danced in the corners of my room, and the whispers returned. "You're not safe here," they taunted, sending shivers down my spine. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of Clara and the sacrifice she was willing to make. Couldn't let her do that. I wouldn't allow it, but what could I do to stop her? The weight of the decision hung heavily on my heart, a constant reminder of the stakes we were facing. The next day, we met at the park, our usual gathering spot now feeling ominous under the gray skies. Clara arrived first, her expression resolute. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice firm. "If we're going to confront the entity, we need to prepare ourselves mentally. We can't let it get inside our heads." "I agree," Jake said, leaning against a tree, his arms crossed. "We need to be strong. We can't let it exploit our fears." "What if we share our fears?" I suggested, feeling a sense of urgency. "If we vocalize them, maybe we can take away the entity's power over us." Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with understanding. "That makes sense. If we acknowledge our fears, we can face them head-on." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of vulnerability press upon me. "I'll go first. I'm afraid of losing the people I care about. After everything that's happened, I can't bear the thought of losing you both." Jake nodded, his expression softening. "I feel the same way. After losing my family, the idea of losing anyone else, it terrifies me. I don't want to watch anyone else disappear." Clara's eyes glistened with tears as she spoke. "I'm afraid of being alone again. Losing my family was the most painful experience of my life. I don't want to feel that emptiness again." We stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of our fears hanging in the air. It was a powerful moment, one that bound us together in our vulnerability. "Let's remember these fears," I said, my voice steady. "As we prepare for the confrontation, we'll hold on to them as a reminder of what we're fighting for. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for each other." With newfound resolve, we spent the day strategizing, preparing for the ritual and the confrontation that lay ahead. As dusk approached, the weight of uncertainty settled over us again. The shadows lengthened, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. As we made our way to the meeting place we had chosen, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the unknown. My heart raced, the fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins. But I held onto the hope that we had forged in our moments of vulnerability, the strength of our bond guiding us forward. We arrived at the clearing, the trees looming ominously around us, their branches swaying slightly in the evening breeze. I looked at Clara and Jake, their faces set with determination, and felt a surge of courage. "We can do this," I said, my voice steady. "Together." As we prepared for the ritual, I couldn't help but glance back at the path we had taken to get here. The darkness that had consumed Maplewood felt palpable, but it would not define us. We were more than our fears. We were warriors ready to fight for our lives and our community. And as the first whispers of the entity began to stir in the air, I knew we were ready to face whatever came next. Together, we would confront the darkness and reclaim our town from the clutches of fear. The night was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the wind. As I stood in the dimly lit room, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation and dread. The air felt electric, charged with the fear and uncertainty that had been building up over the past few days. It was the night of the ritual, the night we hoped would rid Maplewood of the malevolent entity that had haunted us for far too long. Clara stood at the center of the room, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. She had made up her mind about the sacrifice, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Tom, are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it doesn't work? What if I become something else? I stepped closer, my heart racing. Clara, we have to try. This is our only chance to free you and stop the entity. You can't carry this burden alone anymore. I could feel the weight of my own words pressing down on me. It was hard to fathom that we had come to this point where her life, hung in the balance. Jake, who had been standing in the corner, finally broke his silence. This is insane. You can't just decide to sacrifice yourself without considering the consequences. His voice was laced with anger and desperation. We've lost too many people already. Why should it have to be you? Clara turned to him, her eyes blazing. And what do you propose we do, Jake? Stand here and wait for the entity to take more lives? I can feel it getting stronger every day. It's feeding off our fear, and I'm the only one who can stop it. The tension in the room was palpable. I could see the conflict in Jake's eyes, the struggle between his instincts to protect Clara and our desperate need to confront the darkness that loomed over us. I just don't want to lose you, Clara, he said, his voice softer now. We all have to face this together. I nodded in agreement, my heart aching for the pain that was etched on their faces. We will face it together, but we need to be strong. We need to confront our fears head-on. That's the only way this will work. Clara took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the ancient book we had found. The pages were yellowed and fraying, but the words written within promised hope and despair in equal measure. It says here that we need to create a circle of protection, she explained, her voice steadier now. We'll call upon the spirits of those who have been lost to give us strength. Jake moved to her side, determination replacing the fear in his eyes. Let's do this, for everyone we've lost, for the ones who are still here. We can't let the entity continue to thrive on our pain. As we began to prepare, I felt a sense of urgency creeping in. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen as if they were alive, stretching toward us with sinister intent. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that the entity was watching us, waiting for our moment of weakness. We formed a circle, holding hands tightly. Clara recited the incantation from the book, her voice steady and clear. The words resonated in the air, filling the room with a sense of power. I could feel a warmth enveloping us, pushing back against the cold fear that had gripped our hearts. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe and twist as if alive. I could hear whispers echoing around us, the voices of those who had been lost, urging us on. Face your fears, they seemed to say. Only then will you find freedom. Clara's voice faltered as she continued the chant, her eyes rolling back in her head as she began to enter a trance. The room darkened even further, and I felt a surge of panic rise within me. Clara, stay with us, I shouted, squeezing her hand tighter. You need to focus. But it was too late. The entity had found its way in. A dark, swirling mass began to take shape in front of us, coalescing into a form that was both terrifying and familiar. I could feel my heart race as I recognized the features of the entity. It was a grotesque reflection of Clara, twisted and contorted by fear and pain. Clara, I cried out, my voice breaking. You have to fight it. You're stronger than this. The entity laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the room like a death knell. You think you can save her? She is mine, a vessel of fear and despair. She cannot escape her own darkness. Shut up, Jake shouted, his voice filled with rage. You will not take her. We will fight you. With those words, I felt a spark ignite within me. I remembered the moments we had shared, the laughter, the pain, the bond that had formed between us. I turned to Jake, and in that instant, we both understood what we needed to do. We have to confront our own fears, Jake. It's the only way to break this hold. He nodded, determination etched on his face. Together, then, we can do this. I faced the entity, my heart pounding in my chest. You feed off our fear, but we will not let you control us anymore. Clara is not your vessel. She is stronger than you'll ever be. The entity recoiled, its form shimmering with anger. You think you can resist me? I am the darkness within. I will consume you all. What you are is a reflection of our pain, Clara shouted, her voice breaking through the fog of fear. You are not stronger than us. In that moment, I felt a rush of clarity wash over me. Clara was right. The entity was a manifestation of our fears, a collection of all the pain we had endured. We had to confront our own darkness to free her. I'm not afraid of you, I yelled, my voice steady. You are a part of us, but you do not define us. Jake stepped forward, his eyes fierce. We are not alone in this fight. We have each other, and we will not let you win. As we stood together, hand in hand, I felt a surge of energy radiating from us. The darkness began to splinter, the entity's form wavering as our combined strength pushed against it. Face your fears, Clara, I shouted. You can do this. You are not just a vessel. You are a warrior. Clara's eyes flickered open, and for a moment, I saw the fierce spirit within her shining through. I will not let you control me, she screamed, and with that declaration, she stepped forward, breaking the hold the entity had over her. The room exploded in light as Clara confronted the entity, her voice ringing out like a battle cry. I reclaim my power. You will not take me again. The entity shrieked in rage, its form twisting and writhing as it fought against the light. But we stood firm, united in our resolve. Together, we shouted in unison, our voices echoing through the darkness. In a blinding flash, the shadows shattered around us, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. The entity dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the warmth of our connection behind. Clara collapsed to the ground, breathless but free. Clara! I rushed to her side, pulling her into my arms. You did it. You fought it. Jake knelt beside us, tears streaming down his face. We did it together, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We faced our fears, and we won. Clara looked up at us, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you both. I couldn't have done it without you. As we sat there, the weight of the past began to lift. The connection we had forged in the darkness now glowed with promise and hope. Maplewood was safe once more, and we had emerged stronger, united in our shared experience. Let's go home, I said softly, looking at the two people who meant the world to me. We have a new beginning ahead of us. And as we stood together, ready to face whatever came next, I knew that no darkness could ever overshadow the light we had found within ourselves.